The WCOA News and Special Events Department presents 1962, the year in review. This is Don Priest speaking. As the year 1962 departs, let us pause for the next 60 minutes to review what made the big news stories in this past year. Listen now to the names, voices, and sounds which made the year 1962 a memorable one. This is Pensacola, the year 1962 in review. There were many big stories in 1962, yet it develops that three fields of interest held preeminence in Northwest Florida during this past year. These categories involved Mother Nature and natural disaster, space, and schools. January 1962 had hardly recovered from the traditional New Year's celebration when storm clouds gathered over the Florida Panhandle. Without warning, a warm and rainy January the 5th turned into an afternoon of terror for the residents of Crestview, Florida. The word which spread that terror was tornado.
I just talked to Robert Turner in Crestview, and he told me that he saw the twister come over to Crestview from the south.
Was it a frontal cloud, sir?
Yes.
Who is this calling?
J.C. Turner.
Yes, sir.
And I was calling him in reference to property I have there in the business area.
Mm-hmm.
He said it didn't hurt the business area, that it dipped down north of Highway 90.
Yes, sir.
The time, just a few minutes after 4 on a Friday afternoon. The funnel cloud came in from the southwest, slamming into a business, then a residential section of the Okaloosa County seat.
A good many houses were burning. All of the electric light system was out. Everybody was in the dark.
There were houses on fire.
Yes, he said he could look up that way and the sky was lit up red with the houses burning.
All right. Heavens, he has no report of anybody killed. We have a report of one child.
He said there was quite a few injured.
Mm-hmm.
Relief came quickly from the area. National Guardsmen were alerted. Rescue police came from practically every community in the area. From the services at Eglin, Whiting, and Pensacola NAS came relief supplies of food, emergency electricity, and manpower. Meanwhile, other smaller, yet potentially dangerous twisters began touching down at Destin on the Gulf.
Jim, you have just been through the Destin, Florida area where they had a report of a tornado. What can you tell us?
Don, as near as I can tell you, it was not serious. It happened about 1 mile west of the Holiday Inn, right on the highway. Actually, I saw a flash of lights which was knocking out the transformers. There was high wind. I estimate I was about a half a mile from where it occurred. I was the second car to reach there. There was roofs off the top of houses in the highway, and high line wires were stretched out over the road.
One of the first actuality reports from Crestview came from WCOA's Gordon Town.
It's a long, long night ahead here in Crestview, Florida, where at 4:15 to 4:30 this afternoon, Mother Nature hit with full fury. Debris and disaster pretty well sums up the whole story. Homes destroyed, homes unroofed, homes moved off foundations, trailers twisted, completely destroyed. The path of some 2.5 to 3 miles of the city of Crestview damaged, much of it beyond repair.
Heard across the nation was this one from WCOA's John Spears.
So far, one fatality has been reported, a 6-month-old infant. At least 29 people have been treated at the local hospital. Aid has been rushed in from nearby Eglin Air Force Base, local National Guard units, and other communities. Minor fires have broken out in several places. As of now, all communications are almost completely disrupted. The town is in a complete state of chaos and confusion.
Before it was over, 1 dead, an infant, about 17 injured. Damage, about $3 million. Disaster again struck in early March when, without warning, fire broke out at the giant St. Regis Paper Company warehouse. WCOA again was there.
This fire sees flames shooting 50 to 100 feet up in the air. We're parked about 400 feet away from the building which is on fire, and the heat here is intense. It is a very strong breeze which is also blowing the flames outward some 50 to 100 feet. The firemen who are really close up to the fire really must be feeling the strength of this intense fire. As we mentioned, set by 5,500 tons of paper from St. Regis stock, which has gone up in flames. We're parked on the beautiful green grass of the administration building lawn, looking southward right into the fire. We have counted 13 fire trucks. Practically every volunteer fire department in the greater Pensacola area has rushed to assist in this fire. There are firemen working right up to the fire. How they can do it, I don't know. It's hot enough from this point.
Again, one person dead. Damage estimated at $3.5 million. 8,800 tons of rolled paper up in flames. St. Regis Efficiency had most plant workers back at their jobs within 48 hours. The date is March 31st. Another warm, humid, rainy day, much like a predecessor in January. Again the report, funnel cloud. Another tornado. This time, the target, Milton. This time, the toll, 17 persons killed.
I'm reporting to you from North Stewart Street, north of Milton. We have just walked through the devastated area. A house trailer was picked up, smashed to pieces against a house. James Matthews, a flight student, and his wife were in the trailer. An observer said they were not hurt. Trees were uprooted, kin wrapped around the trees. The tops of trees twisted off like matchsticks. We stopped at the home of Floyd Douglas, 1514 Stewart Street, the roof completely torn off. Douglas and his 10-year-old son were in the living room. 3 were still in bed. He said the roaring was worse than thunder. It was awful, lasted just a brief instant. A 14-year-old boy in that house, one of the children, was in a mattress. It blew the mattress off the bed, wrapped it around the child, and he was saved. Mrs. Douglas was crying. She says, "We worked hard for what we have." The Escambia Gas Company building was completely demolished, torn to pieces. 4 men were in it, none of them hurt. C.M. Raley, Pete Stewart, Mac McKee, and W.F. Pittman. Mr. Raley told me that they were under a counter after the window blew out. Concrete blocks then were piled on top of the counter. He said the good Lord saved us.
Search and rescue squad members from Escambia County, the services, the police, Red Cross, Salvation Army, all pitched in to help those made destitute by this killer storm which whipped across the north side Milton residential area. Again, offshoot spouts touched at Destin, but damage was minor, injuries were nil. We had hoped that the tornado had seen its last of northwest Florida, but it hadn't. The date was July 4th. The scene was crowded Pensacola Beach, when waterspout turned tornadoes lashed through the area, dumping copious amounts of rainfall and touching briefly at the Gulf Breeze area.
The story of a homeowner, Nat Rotrow Jr., the town constable of the Gulf Breeze area, Dick Smith, and WCOA's Bo Mitchell.
The wind was coming from every direction, it seemed like. And it must have blown down 3 or 4 dozen big pines around here, hickory trees, took my chimney off, my TV antenna, all my furniture, my patio furniture's all gone. A few seconds we heard this roaring noise. The house began to tremble and things began to fly through the air.
As it moved some 300 or 400 yards down the beach area on the bay side, the funnel went on up in the air some 2,000 feet. We could see debris going up in the air from the funnel.
The weather furnished us with records during 1962, but they were the wrong kind. Temperatures dipped to 13 degrees above zero in the first 10 days of the month. It stayed below freezing for over 60 hours. Summer proved hot and dry. Then the freeze returned as never before in this century. December 13th was the second coldest day in Pensacola's recorded history when official thermometer readings dropped to 10.2 degrees above zero. Again, freeze and ice and nearly snow. We certainly had seen our share of weather of varying sorts in 1962. You're listening to Pensacola 1962, the year's news in review.
Northwest Florida made important contributions to America's space progress in 1962. This area, with its schools, military installations, and scientists, was deeply involved in keeping this country well into space.
Hello, Merrill.
Yes, Don.
They've just picked him up here at Eglin, west-northwest of Austin, Texas. Tracking is on schedule. Everything looks good at this point.
All yours, Don. You follow him.
All right. This is a relay, incidentally, from the commander of the radar station. Eglin Air Force Base is now transmitting data. It is very important data in that it goes both to Goddard in Maryland and also to Cape Canaveral.
The space tracking station at Eglin Air Force Base had much to do with the tracking of American astronauts, all of whom spun successfully about planet Earth.
Now over the Beaumont, Port Arthur, Texas area. Now he is moving, here's a later report, south of New Orleans. And as we check our projected schedule, everything seems to be okay. In about a minute from now, he should be reaching his closest point to us at Eglin, which is about 120 miles south of Mobile, Alabama. At that point, Carpenter and the Aurora 7 capsule will be 51 miles. He's already descended 50 miles from the point over California where the retro rockets were fired to this point south of Mobile. Now, he will be slowing down from an estimated 17,500 miles at the close to about 270 miles per hour. We've lost track. Just a second ago, we lost track. We figured that might happen, Merrill, because of the ionization problem and the changing of the attitude of the capsule.
Don, whereabouts geographically did you lose him?
South of Mobile.
South of Mobile. We got him.
Correction. We'll make that correct. Over the Everglades. Now, this is nothing to worry about because that is where the Eglin officials presumed they would lose him. Over the Everglades in South Peninsula.
Every answer we have found at least 3 new questions. I think we need God in the center of our universe today more urgently than ever before.
This is German-American scientist Dr. Werner von Braun as he spoke to the public of Pensacola the night of April 6. It was through the efforts of such men as Dr. von Braun that America's space progress in 1962 was successful.
The stem upward and the roots downward, and not the other way around. What gives us the instruction to grow a root structure when it is still a tiny little seed, hardly maybe the stem an inch high, a root structure that is adequate to cope with wind loads that the grown-up tree may be subjected 50 years later? What provides this instruction for that little seed? All I can say is, for all the long Latin and Greek words I have read trying to explain this miracle, to me it is still a miracle.
Then Pensacola got to meet the men themselves. The man in question was astronaut Scott Carpenter, who came to Pensacola to present the forthcoming museum his aviator gold wings that adorned his uniform on the epoch-making three-orbit flight of May 25th.
The entire group went through 2 separate phases of their training here. A very, very valuable part of the training was the water survival exercise that we had here. We also utilized the night vision training available here and the disorientation equipment here. These last 2 were most valuable. They all were valuable, and we will continue to use these facilities as long as they're provided.
Not all space information related to human beings in space. In July, America's Telstar orbit scored another first for the United States, this time for privately owned initiative.
The first telephone message in the world, as a matter of fact, over an active satellite.
Indeed, I have, Mr. Capel. The progress of the satellite from the time it was launched early this morning from Cape Canaveral by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has been most gratifying to all Americans.
Much of the research work for space medicine came from the Navy's School of Aviation Medicine. Much of the training of the astronauts was done here in Pensacola. In the future, moonshots will be tracked by the new multi-million moon track station to be built near Defuniak Springs. Surely this area of the nation has made more than the normal contribution to the use of outer space during the year 1962. You're listening to Pensacola 1962, the year's news in review.
The classroom became an issue and became a means of study. In the case of our 2-year college, one of controversy during the year now concluded. Good news! Work was being performed by the Florida Congressional Delegation to seek funds to centralize the Naval School of Aviation here in Pensacola. A pleased man was Admiral James L. Holland.
This facility we've been trying to get, as a matter of fact, for a number of years, and we do have approval by the Navy Department and the Department of Defense for this new building, which will house primarily our research laboratories, which are now scattered in several different buildings over the Naval Air Station compound.
Later, Florida Congressman Robert L.F. Sykes added his efforts to seeing to it that the money for the school was approved by Congress.
So the bill passed the Senate, contains the Naval Aviation School of Medicine building, but for only $3,825,000.
The school's money, nearly $4 million worth of construction funds, were approved by Congress, and the work is expected to begin sometime during the year to follow. It was a foregone conclusion that when the school year began in September, that some Pensacola schools would be desegregated for the first time. The question was, how many? And what about public reaction? On one side, we have the sad lessons to be learned from Little Rock and New Orleans. We have the opportunity to profit from such areas as Atlanta and cities in North Carolina where the process of integration proved comparatively effortless. Local citizens and officials cast away personal feelings in the matter to work profitably to see that Pensacola would peaceably enter its 1963 school season, which it did.
While some of our schools will be integrated this year, we're confident that within the school itself, we will make satisfactory adjustments so that the educational progress of no child in the school will be impaired. We've had such complete assurance of cooperation from the law enforcement agencies of the community that we have no reason to expect anything other than a normal school opening.
Dr. W.J. Woodham was one person vitally concerned with the process. As the superintendent of Escambia Public Instruction stated, it was his job to see that local school operation this year was as normal as any other year. That it proved to be. Monday, August the 27th, was about as normal as any other year in which youngsters have started their year in local schools. The only difference this year was that over 20 Negro students entered previously all-white county schools. Meanwhile, a federal judge has ordered that in 1963, both first and second grades must be integrated. The year upon us may bring new problems, but with the knowledge of the past year, the area stands in far better stead than others. 1962 saw a concerted effort undertaken by Pensacolians to secure a four-year college. Governor Ferris Bryant started the action when, back during the 1960 campaign, he stood squarely for a four-year Pensacola University.
I am committed to the establishment at the earliest possible date of a new four-year college for Pensacola.
Thank you very much,
Later,
Mr. Bryant.
the governor came to Pensacola and in early January to voice further opinions on the subject. The progress toward that college received a setback when a report issued by Wisconsin educator Dr. Guy Folk stated that Pensacola might need a four-year college, but not today, nor for the next 8 years. The report also suggested that a college be built further eastward than Pensacola, independent of present PJC facilities. Local citizens disagreed. Among them, Pensacola's junior college educator, Dr. Henry Ashmore.
I was deeply disappointed with the survey report concerning the four-year college recently presented to the Board of Control in Pensacola, Florida. We had hoped at Pensacola Junior College that this would be a fair, accurate, and honest report, and that it would make a real attempt to determine how Pensacola Junior College might fit into the total picture of higher education in the Pensacola area. However, in all fairness, we would have to say that this was not, in reality, a news report, but was a restatement of the philosophies and the former statements of Dr. Broward Culpepper, the executive director of the Board of Control.
Public opinion gelled towards immediate action. As the year came to a close, the area awaits a favorable decision from the Board of Control to recommend that the forthcoming legislature work toward establishment of Pensacola Junior College within the immediate future to a four-year college status. There is a four-year college committee composed of many local citizens. State legislators have raised their voices towards establishment of a Pensacola four-year college now. Local governing bodies, clubs, and organizations have lent their support. With a legislative meeting due this spring, the words four-year Pensacola College will be heard many times in 1963. You're listening to Pensacola 1962, the year's news in review.
The year 1962 was the year of the election. But for Pensacola, northwest Florida, it was a year when the politicians sometimes outnumbered the voter, it seemed, and save for blotches of interest, voter apathy was predominant. The April Democratic primaries provided the one true old-fashioned mudslinging politician race. Democratic State Senator Philip Beall, the incumbent, faced the political fight of his life when he was opposed by young State Representative Reuben O'Donovan Askew. The race appeared a toss-up as it ran into the final hours of campaigning, but when the votes were counted election night in May, it was not even very close. Askew assumed the state senator's chair.
Well, Dave, I should like to extend my appreciation to the many people who have been so gracious and who have helped me in this effort. I certainly don't feel it was mine at all, but
It was shared by so many people that I knew were working for me, and so many people I'm sure that were working for me that I didn't even know about, and I should like to tell them all, one and all, thank you so very much.
The November two-year elections produced the first Republican candidate to run for office here in several years. Popular incumbent Robert L.F. Bob Sykes, with a minimum of campaigning, however, was an easy victor over W.W. Pat Woolley of Fort Walton Beach.
I'm very pleased and proud at the fine vote of confidence that the new First District has given to me. I have great hopes, great expectations for Northwest Florida. I've seen it come a long ways. I've been privileged to go with the First District in its great progress forward.
Again, voter turnout was a pittance in the November elections. One bright spot, Gulf Breeze, where an interesting council election brought out 85% of those registered to vote. In February, Pensacola named a new police chief. The continuance of revamping of Pensacola's once scandal-ridden police department reached a major point with the announcement that Sergeant D.P. Caldwell had been selected as Pensacola's police chief.
It is indeed an honor that I certainly didn't expect to receive this appointment as chief of police, and I certainly, the other officers that passed the test were all good men, and I'm sure that they will support me and the program that we outlined for the benefit of the citizens.
A complete reworking of the city's police department continued through the year with new departments, division heads, and procedures. Pensacolians feel a point of pride about their men in blue today. Crime did not take a holiday by any means, but conditions have improved noticeably. Major crime dwindled. There were exceptions, such as Tuesday, July 10th, when a lone gunman walked into the Mutual Federal Savings and Loan Association branch office on North Pace Boulevard and walked out with $6,217.
This is Thomas Watson, president of the Mutual Federal Savings and Loan Association. This morning at approximately 12:15, the Pace Boulevard office of the Mutual Federal was held up and robbed, and the loss amounted to approximately $8,069. This loss is fully insured by the association's insurance coverage. The Pace office was briefly closed while furnishing information to investigating agencies.
The FBI joined local officers in staging a manhunt for the man believed to be 27-year-old James V. Sellers, a sometime policeman turned private detective and parolee from other accounts. The search for Sellers would probably still be on today if it wasn't for Sellers himself. He returned to this area and gave himself up in a fashion. Sellers was sent to federal prison for 15 years. First capital crime sentence in 30 years was carried out in the spring when Johnny Hill went to the electric chair for the shooting to death of a 19-year-old sailor after a 1960 incident. But there were other, brighter, more interesting facets to the year 1962. The city had visitors such as Major League Baseball player Jimmy Pearsall, who speaks for himself.
Just was one of those things where I was rough on those writers in Cleveland. I didn't like them, and got to the point where they wrote so much about me. I was glad they did. It helped me a lot, but it took a lot away from the ball club. They would write different things, not only about me, but anything that would be detrimental to a ball club, put pressure on the young pitchers and the ball players on the club. And I feel that, as far as I'm concerned, they did help themselves by getting a pitcher that they need badly. They needed an older pitcher who would be a leader for them. I think Donovan's the guy, and I'm very happy to get away from a very depressing town.
There was progress. An example last spring when Florida enacted the new Lower Perdido Bay Bridge, linking Gulf Shores with western Escambia County.
This is a great occasion. Sometimes we think as we look to space ventures and to attempt to bore down through the core of the earth into the center of the earth, that all the new frontiers, as they were a long way away from us. And then men of vision, such as your great governor of Alabama, those who have had a great part in this in Florida, the members of the County Commission of Escambia County, whose money has gone into this project, look ahead and see a new frontier that is right under our very noses.
Northwest Florida welcomed the President of the United States in May when President Kennedy and practically anybody who is anybody in the government's Washington family came to the Florida Panhandle to view a firepower display. Reporters Gordon Town and Don Priest were surrounded by dignitaries at Eglin Air Force Base on that May day.
Throughout the trip from the Eglin Air Proving Ground to Range 52, the highways, the streets of Valparaiso, Niceville were jammed with people. High schools had turned out. Their bands were participating. Mr. Kennedy was well received. There were signs all along the way and American flags in evidence everywhere. Even one filling station operator said, "Hi, Jack. Jack Samico welcomes Jack Kennedy." Eglin Air Force Base became capital of the United States for today when President Kennedy, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, a host of senators and representatives, governors of many states, and other high government officials, including generals of the Air Force, took part in this firepower demonstration at Range 52, plus the static displays and the arrival of President Kennedy.
A 24-year-old Pensacolian shot his way into the finals of the National Amateur Golf Tournament in Pinehurst, North Carolina. Only a complete reversal of form kept young Downing Gray from winning. But Pensacola took time out to welcome home their hero. Mayor Charles Overman gave Downing the keys to the city.
Downing, sports fans and citizens of Pensacola, on behalf of the city officials and all the citizens, it's indeed a pleasure to be with you and to help welcome you back to the city after the feat that you have performed. You have certainly led the name of Pensacola completely across this nation.
This seems rather ironical to me, being given the key to the city and being thanked by everyone here for what I did for Pensacola. I think it only proper, actually, that I should be thanking the people of Pensacola for giving me their wonderful backing, their kind consideration, sending me wonderful telegrams, phone calls, everything in the world. I thank you. Thank you.
One news story that will not have a 1962 ending and is City Councilman John P. O'Donovan's assertion that the newsstands and magazine racks of Pensacola are garbage heaps of smut and indecent literature. Now, this isn't a new assertion. In 1961, a committee was formed to combat the reported infestation, and a grand jury mildly slapped wrists, but nothing was changed particularly. Now, another assertion by Councilman O'Donovan.
I think that the main point to be made in this discussion on the sale of pornographic material, obscene material, on the newsstands in the city of Pensacola is the fact that the city of Pensacola is fortunate enough to have an ordinance on the books making it illegal in certain terms for the sale of this material. What I advocate in this program, that along with many other fellow Pensacola businessmen and city councilmen, is the fact that definite steps are going to have to be made to enforce this law, arrests be made, and prosecuted.
As the year 1963 unfolds, a grand jury, the second one in slightly over a year to study this subject, has the matter in abeyance. Reapportionment was one of Florida's big stories in 1962. The legislature wrestled with the subject, and a reapportionment amendment was presented to the citizens of the state to vote upon. Led by downstate areas definitely not favored by the proposition, the amendment was turned back. The pork choppers and urbanites then fought through a 3-week special session which ended in a draw. Before it did, however, the state legislature heard from a Sarasota real estate agent who suggested that Northwest Florida be given to Alabama and that North Central and Northeast Florida be ceded to Georgia. Comments were varied.
Gentleman from Escambia. I would concur in that, and I would tell you, as a new part of Alabama, the first thing we intend to do is put up toll roads and an air corridor between the new state of Florida.
Gentleman from Leon, Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, the gentleman from Escambia knows whereof he speaks since, of course, he gets his mail in Alabama already. Gentleman from Sarasota.
Mr. Speaker, right to the point of personal privilege here, I am sure that the gentleman, Art Clark, has not expressed the sentiments of the majority of Sarasota County.
It might be added that feelings of some of the members of the local legislative delegation did favor a fairer apportionment of higher centers of population. One of these, Escambia State Senator Ruben Odiescu. Pensacola, with a winning baseball club and favorable attendance, bid farewell to professional baseball for the time being when the Class D Alabama-Florida League folded. Refusal of some teams to accept Negro baseball players, thus losing major league affiliation, was the compelling reason. Pensacola Ball Club supporter Joe Panassione reflects on baseball in Pensacola.
Well, of course, I'm just like everyone else. I'm terribly disappointed that the Alabama-Florida League will not operate in 1963. But I feel that it's just a temporary thing, and just as soon as they solve the realignment problems to where they will form a new Alabama-Florida League, or possibly a new Northwest Florida League with new towns, that Pensacola should be back in baseball, I'd say, within the next 2 years. We have to improve our facilities here.
In 1 week in December, 9 persons died in 3 auto collisions. One crash alone saw 7 persons killed at the Molino Crossroads. 2 Negroes were held for the murder of 2 Pensacola service station operators as the result of armed robberies over a year's span. And Pensacola welcomed the 42,000-ton aircraft carrier Lexington as its new training carrier for the Naval Air Training Command. Its captain is a man of determination, Captain L.C. Powell.
Among those of us who have spent some years in the Navy, it is an insensitive and unfeeling sailor who can walk aboard Lexington without a feeling akin to professional reverence for her historic past. The name Lexington connotes a host of flying heroes, all of whom received their initial training here. It is entirely fitting that this great ship should be honored with this assignment to the cradle of naval aviation.
And at the same time, the city bid adieu to a 5.5-year resident, the carrier Antietam. She goes into mothballs.
This is a sad occasion for many of us here in Pensacola to see this fine ship leaving us and leaving her period of active duty. She is just a ship. There are many others just like her, made of steel and iron, lots of other materials. But as in all such cases, the officers and men who man her make her what she is.
A voice of farewell is that of Vice Admiral Fitzhugh Lee of Pensacola, NAF. Controversy on the bridge. Highway deaths on Pensacola's 3.5-mile Bay Bridge were blamed on a slightly raised median strip running the length of the span. This opinion was shared by Gulf Breeze Police Constable Richard Smith.
We have had 5 deaths in the past 6 or 8 months as a result of that median strip. Each and every motorist, in my opinion, is in danger when they drive across this bridge. Driving the normal speed limit, if you have mechanical failure or a tire blowout and your car is forced over that median strip, there is a possibility you'll receive the same thing these other 5 motorists received.
Too often, witnesses reported the grind of metal and the crash of cars on the bridge. Too much speed, too little control.
And all of a sudden, there was nothing but a shower of flame and sparks, a lot of noise, a lot of screeching of metal. I saw the 2 cars head for the opposite lane, stopped my automobile. My date and I got out. I ran back, found a few boys climbing out of the cars. Some of them were bleeding. They looked like they were hurt. I tried to help them out. My girl came back, and she's had a little medical experience. She took care of them best she could. I got my parachute out, cut it up with a knife, and made bandages.
A Tallahassee State Road Board official, Billy Mayo, promised action.
Well, of course, by law, we would be prohibited from even letting a contract or thinking about
That action came quickly, as today a raised and reinforced span of steel and concrete now bisects and protects lanes of traffic on the bridge. Not much for looks, the span serves as both an actual deterrent and a psychological deterrent. Its menacing facade has slowed down bridge traffic somewhat. No autos have yet challenged its vulnerability. The Battle of Bayou Chico. This was a highlight of the fall of 1962. One of the owners of the area's mahogany lumber concern pleaded for state aid and chemical effluent in the bayou to save his business. The Weisbricker Mahogany Company discovered that for the first time since 1912, teredo worms had entered Bayou Chico in strong enough quantities to begin destroying their valuable mahogany logs. The only change officials felt that had happened in the bayou and could cause such a condition was the removal of chemical effluent from the bayou as ordered by the State Health Department, the effluent coming from nearby manufacturers. Mahogany Company official M.H. Weiss appealed for aid lest he be forced to move the longtime Pensacola area business.
This time we have in the bayou approximately $600,000 worth of logs amounting to 2.5 million feet of mahogany, which we know the Toretos are working on as we discovered them in the mill today for the first time. There's no way to stop this that I know of unless the Newport Company is permitted to put its effluent back into the bayou again. And unless it does so, then we're apt to lose this entire thing. And, of course, we have no choice in the matter except to look for other sites which have been offered us in Mobile, Alabama, and which we are very interested in at the present time, though we certainly do not want to move.
The answer, well, there is none at this time. The Weisbricker concern has stored its valuable lumber logs on land, and there has yet to be a correct chemical answer as to the problem which surrounds Bayou Chico. Pensacola welcomed home Berlin crisis returnees when the USS Tweedy was decommissioned after serving 8 months and using 100 Northwest Florida reservists as part of their crew.
The USS Tweedy a short time ago returned to inactive duty. The destroyer escort has been away from its home port of Pensacola for about the past 8 months since it was called up to active duty on October the 2nd, 1961. It was called up during the height of the Berlin crisis as Pensacola did its part in the Cold War. The commission pennant was lowered about 10:15 this morning, and the 100-plus men from Northwest Florida that manned her as they rescued 4 Cuban refugees, fought a 100-mile-an-hour gale in the Atlantic, returned to civilian life. Some will go back to their jobs as real estate brokers, Chemstrand employees, civilian employees here at the Naval Air Station, junior college students, and even 2 City of Pensacola policemen. The USS Tweedy is back, and the people that manned her are civilians once again. Dave Pavlak, WCOA News, reporting from NAS Mainside.
The face of city government in Pensacola saw sweeping changes in 1962. Not only a drastic change in operations improvements and a sewage tax, but in personnel as well. One unpremeditated change of command came when Pensacola's longtime and highly respected chief of fire department men, Claude Wright, tendered his resignation.
Not definitely. I tried to stay away from establishing a routine procedure. I've talked with quite a few people here this morning that has retired, and I jokingly requested that they give me a few minutes of their time to tell me how to learn how to live over again. But I don't have any definite plans. I plan to travel around the country at my leisure time, whenever as I see fit. I'm going over to Houston, Texas tomorrow, and I'll be over there for some time, but from there I don't know.
The same day that the city of Pensacola had Chief Wright as its guest of honor at a reception, a new chief was named.
The new Pensacola fire chief is named this afternoon by City Manager Homer Reed as 38-year-old Lloyd C. Fleming, Jr. of 619 South D Street. Congratulations, now Chief Fleming.
Thank you, Don. I deem it a privilege to follow in the footsteps of such a highly respected and competent fire chief as Chief Claude Wright. and it is my hopeful prayer that I can continue to hold this office with the same respect that he has held it for the past 17 years. And it is also my wish that City Manager Homer D. Reed, as well as myself, working together, can continue to work for the benefit of our greater Pensacola area. Thank you, Don.
Thus did the year 1962 end of a note of change, improvement in which all of us strive to bring for a better Pensacola in 1963. You have been listening to Pensacola 1962, the year's news in review. This is Don Priest speaking. Presentation of this program at the outset of a new year is another in the continuing aims of WCOA News to present its listeners with the most complete and comprehensive coverage of news and special events. My thanks go out to Dave Pavlock, Bo Mitchell, Gordon Town, Chuck Honeycutt, Gene Falser, and John Spears of the WCOA staff, whose day in and day out efforts not only make a program of this possible, but every day, up-to-the-minute news coverage, a continuing item of quality at WCOA. Speaking for the entire WCOA radio staff, may we wish you all that is good for the year 1963.